Did you have anything picked out, or?
Parents have a lot more. Or
maybe not that, but
Did
still, you can have.
you do the next three courses?
No, we just, Cindy did a couple of Christmas carols for church, we didn't do anything for Sunday.
Yeah.
Right, or the teacher.
Right.
That
Parents
seems
are.
logical.
Parents are.
Teachers are teachers.
That's a Jenny. Your car out
She
there.
spent her life correcting my English.
How are
Correcting
you?
my English.
you?
All right, taking care of correcting your home.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think, well, where she left off, I can start. Had
There you
him
go.
to the vet the other night. He's doing a little bit better.
What did that have to say?
She told me. Yeah, I don't think
Maybe
so.
you need different
But,
vets.
yeah, exactly. I don't think that's it at all. Hi, Joan. Hello. How are you? You see, I say, you see. I see that. Thank you, ma'am.
Oh, busy day, busy day.
Whew.
And I was hanging out with
How
your
are you
mother
doing?
teenage boys.
Just race for all the snow
That is
coming.
good to me. Yeah.
Honestly,
good.
honestly,
I'm
that
gonna go
doesn't
white
change that
Christmas.
much once they get past the teens and into the 20s and the 30s and probably on into the 40s.
It
Before
was
there's
just
any noticeable change.
It's been quite a while.
Good evening.
Good
Good
evening.
evening.
Let's take our hymn books and turn to hymn number 112. Hymn number 112. There's a song in the air.
That's my fault.
cradles a king. There's a tumult of joy for the wonderful birth, for the virgin sweet boy is the Lord of the earth. By the star reigns its fire while the beautiful sing, for the manger of Bethlehem cradles the King. Verse number 4. We rejoice in the light, and we echo the song that we sing through the night from the heavenly throne. I will shout to the lovely angels they bring, and we bring in His freedom. Then turn over a couple pages to 114, the first Noel. 114. On a cold winter's night that was sweet. Noel, 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 Noel. Born is the King of Israel. They looked up and saw a star shining in the east beyond them far, and to the earth it gave great light, and so it continued both day and night. Noel, Noel, Noel. Born is the King of Israel. Verse number 5. Then entered in those wise men three, well recognized on their knee, and offered there in His presence their gold and myrrh and frankincense. Noel, Noel, Noel. Born is the King of number 107, Angels We Have Heard on High. Number 107.
Yeah, that one.
Angels we have heard arise, sweetly singing o'er the plain, and the mountains in reply echo back their joyous strain. In excelsis Deo. In excelsis Shepherds fly this jubilee, by your joyous strains are borne. Say what may the tidings be, which inspire your heavenly song. In excelsis Bethlehem and see him whose birth the angels sing. Adore attentively Christ the Lord, the newborn King. In excelsis Verse number 4. See within a manger lay Jesus, Lord of heaven and earth. Mary, Joseph, when you're eight, with us sing our Savior's word. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Jimmy.
All right, well, it's good to see each of you here tonight. We have Jerry and Nanette online. I don't know, do we have any others, Bethany? Okay, so anyway, good to have them with us. Glad Jimmy was feeling good enough to come tonight.
Me too.
Yeah, me too.
So Michelle, is your cat improving still?
I think he's going to be okay. I'm praying and hoping.
Okay,
He seems to be better than he was the past few days.
okay,
Yeah, he's coming along.
okay.
And I want to say I appreciate all the prayers from everyone. I've been praying my heart out too, and I think he's improving.
Good, good.
Thank you for asking.
Let's see. We prayed this morning for Jennifer's son, Bobby,
Migraine.
with a migraine. Yeah. Anything else going on? Beth had safe travels today, so that was good.
3 more days. I found out Jimmy and Skylar are definitely coming for New Year's Day. So
Okay.
I was real happy to hear that. They
Good.
can only be here one day.
Uh,
Skylar has to work New Year's Eve and she has to work the 2nd.
wow.
So they
That's a-
are going to come now.
That's a
So,
quick turnaround.
Yeah.
That's a long drive but they're young.
Yes. And resilient.
Yeah.
From Wisconsin.
Yes. From Madison.
Let's see. So what have we got going on here? Sunday, 9:45. We'll have an abbreviated Sunday school / devotional. And then probably shortly after 10, a brunch. It'll be a lot lighter brunch than our Thanksgiving one. And then the morning service will have special music and probably a skit and some other things. And then we're done for the day. We're not coming back for the evening service. So this is, I guess this is the final study in Isaiah for 2022. So we'll pick up with wherever we end tonight. We'll pick up next year on January 1st, because New Year's Day is, of course, on a Sunday. Let's see. Speaking of New Year's Day, so New Year's Eve, 6:00 here at the church. Soup and bring something to pass. I don't know, some kind of I don't know. What do we suggest?
You want to eat?
Well, yeah. Bring
Yeah.
what you want to eat.
Bring something, and bring a game to play. We have to complete our challenge that we started with the escape room game, because we had the adults versus the other adults, the younger adults versus the older adults, however that works. And we did a practice round. Well, now we got to do the real thing. So I'll be bringing that. So bring your favorite board games or whatever. Again, we usually wrap up by 9 or so we don't actually get to usher in the new year. And then services on New Year's Day will just be normal. All right. So we are in Isaiah chapter 19. Now, if I was one of those preachers that plans out every sermon for a year or two in advance, I probably would have planned so we'd be somewhere around Isaiah 7 through 9 right now, because there's all those messianic promises. But me, I don't do that. And so we're in the middle of the burdens. Isaiah is sharing these burdens that God has placed upon him. It's a burden for who he's speaking to, but it's also a burden to Isaiah because it's bad news. And anytime you're conveying bad news, that should be a hard, difficult thing. If you take joy in sharing bad news, there's something wrong. And so it was a burden on both sides. We finished up last week, chapter 18, which was the not a burden, but a woe to Ethiopia. And it was a little bit different. And that's one of the things we found out about these burdens, because we've looked at Philistia and we've looked at Moab and we've looked at Babylon and Assyria and Damascus. There's all these different burdens, but unlike Numbers, Cindy, where you have repetition of the princes of this tribe brought this, and then the princes of this tribe brought the exact same thing, and the princes of the next tribe brought the next. Every one of these burdens is different depending on the people group that it's directed towards. So, for example, Moab, there was more of a sense of sorrow because there's a big connection between Moab and Israel, and even in the birth of Christ, where you have Ruth in the lineage of Jesus. And so anyway, so chapter 19 and 20, because they both deal with this, is with Egypt. And remember, Egypt and Israel have had a back and forth relationship. Sometimes they're allies, sometimes they're foes, sometimes they're reluctant allies. And so Isaiah has brought this burden to Egypt, and last week we rabbit trailed, but deliberately, because the very first verse, well, first of all, it started out with some interesting visual imagery, the Lord riding upon a swift cloud. But what did we find when we studied other Old Testament passages?
That's not that unusual.
Yeah, it's a very common description of God, because, of course, we know God doesn't have to physically travel from one place to another, so he doesn't actually ride on a swift cloud, but it helps us to understand, because, of course, God is omnipresent. He's spirit, and outside of our material world and our timeline and all of that. But where we rabbit trailed was the second part of the verse, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved or shaken at his presence. And so what did we do? We spent, 20 minutes or so doing what?
Talking about how could that be in other times when the Ark of the Covenant was taken.
Yeah, we talked about that
Other
one.
idol was like,
Yeah,
and then
he
they
fell on his face.
propped him up and said, "Don't do that again." And then they came back, he was down.
And then we looked at one other historical time where God shook up the God specifically of Egypt.
Oh, the plagues.
The plagues, yeah, the 10 plagues, where each of those plagues, confronted head to head one of the many gods of Egypt. And so we spent a little time just looking at that. We had done an in-depth study of that, quite a few years ago. And then he began to describe this burden. So the Lord is coming upon a swift cloud, so it's coming quickly, and it's going to shake up the very idols of Egypt. The heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. When your heart melts, that means that you give up hope. It's all over. There's nothing I can do. And that's going to happen to Egypt with this burden. When does this burden take place? Well, that's a little bit tricky, and we'll talk about that, especially next year. But typically the burdens have been both a relatively short term. By relatively, I mean what?
Contemporary to the time of Isaiah.
Okay. But actually, in some cases, that relative contemporary time was stretched quite a bit compared to normal.
It could have been 100 years.
Yeah, 100 years or more. But then there was also like an end time application of it, which, of course, we know, is more than 2,000 years before that will be fully completed. And so this one's a little bit hard to narrow down and put on the timeline, but a number of things are going to happen. The first thing we find is that there's going to be internal strife. It sounds like the Egyptian Civil War, brother fighting against brother, blue against gray, and it might be your kin, your family on the other side of the line facing you with their rifle drawn. I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight everyone against his brother and everyone against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. I'll tell you what, that's not a pleasant time to live in a nation where it's got that political strife tearing it apart. Okay, so we talk about our political division, and we certainly seem to be a divided country politically right now, but we're not to this point. We're not outside of some exceptions. We're not debating our political differences at gunpoint. It may come to that, but we're not there now. But Egypt was known for that. Egypt has a long history of internal strife. There's the northern Egypt and the southern Egypt, and sometimes they were separate and ruled by different monarchs. Sometimes they were united. There was the whole time period where Ethiopia had conquered Egypt and controlled it for more than 70 years. And so this has been an ongoing thing, kind of a Hatfield and McCoy's kind of thing. But it sounds like it's going to get even worse. And this is the burden that Isaiah is sharing. And not only that, but the result, verse 3, is that the spirit's going to fail. Now, the spirit there, some Bible commentaries think that was the demonic spiritual influence in Egypt, and certainly with their false gods, because generally behind false gods are demonic influence. Yeah. And so they're saying that the demonic spirit of Egypt has failed. I don't think so. I think it goes with the heart of Egypt melting in verse 1. But they're looking around and saying, there's no hope. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no silver lining in this cloud. And so what did they turn to?
The idols and the charmers, the mediums and the wizards.
We could point fingers pretty easy at them, those heathens. But what did we do? We look back at chapter 8, and who was turning to false gods in chapter 8? I'll make it simple. Israel. Yeah. Israel. Instead of turning to the true God, they turned after false gods. So again, certainly Egypt was wrong for following after their gods, but they had a little more of an excuse than Israel had been chosen from the time of Abraham forward by the true God. And yet, how many times did they chase after the foreign gods, the false gods around them? Verse 4, I'm going to give Egypt over into the hand of a cruel lord and a fierce king. So you not only have internal strife, but now you have someone ruling who's cruel. Now, this could be somebody outside of Egypt, and we looked at some of the different possibilities, some of the Ethiopian rulers. It could be the Assyrian rulers like Sargon or Sennacherib and some others, or it could go all the way forward to Artaxerxes, the Persian king, who was what? Crazy.
I was that was exactly what popped to my mind. It was like,
yeah, and so it could have been any one of these in the near future. But again, you don't want to live in a country that has a despotic, wicked ruler.
Whether he's from there or from someplace else, it doesn't
exactly.
matter.
And then we made it to verse 5. And that's where we ended last week. So let's go ahead and hopefully have your Bibles open to chapter 19. And flip over one page. And the water shall fail from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up. And so we talked last week that the word for sea here is used in a lot of different ways in Scripture. Everything from a river to a small body of water to the Mediterranean Sea. Although the Mediterranean Sea, when the word is used for sea, it's always associated with what? The Great Sea. So that one's pretty easy to determine. So this isn't talking about the Great Sea drying up. So if we're talking about Egypt, which sea would it probably be talking about?
Probably the Nile.
Yeah, I mean, it could be the Red Sea, that the Israelites crossed over, but most likely it was the Nile and its tributaries, and of course up here in the fertile area of Goshen, where it spread out into all of those tributaries, yeah, and fed back into the Mediterranean Sea and so on. That was the lifeblood, literally, not literally, non-literally, but even to where they had gods who, the god of the Nile was the god of the bloodstream of Egypt. So they viewed the Nile in that way. And suddenly it's going to fail. The rivers, tributaries, branches are wasted and dried up. Oh, by the way, the other time, one of the reasons it could also be called the sea is, of course, at flood stage. The Nile would overflow its banks. And if you've ever seen a river that's overflown its banks, it can be a pretty big body of water. Might be fairly shallow, but a pretty big body of water. But now it's dried up. And so what's going to happen? And we kind of left it with that teaser, just brainstorming a little bit. When the Nile dried up, okay, when you lose a water source, it's difficult for anybody, any community. I mean, if the Flint River dried up, for one thing, who knows what you would find in the riverbed. But if it dried up,
The history of the automobile in Michigan.
yeah, exactly. It would be hard. It would be a hardship. And but in Egypt's case, it wasn't just a hardship, it was devastating to them. And so let's go ahead and take up there at verse 6. And they shall turn the rivers far away, and the brooks of defense shall be emptied and dried up. The reeds and flags shall wither. Reeds and flags were what?
Water plants.
Yeah, the water plants like the papyrus and other things like that. They're going to be dried up. They're going to be useless. Verse 7, the paper reeds by the brooks, by the mouth of the brooks, and everything sown by the brooks shall wither, be driven away, and be no more. What does it mean to be sown by the brooks?
Maybe this, either next to, or the seeds came floating down the
Okay.
creek and landed and grew.
Yeah, and also it could refer to, again, that flood stage, because what did the flood stage do that benefited?
It fertilizes silt on the banks that it's overflowed,
Yeah.
and then that's rich in rotted plant material, which plants love.
And so the seeds take hold there and grows abundantly. But that's going to wither. It's going to be driven away. It's going to be no more. So what happens? Well, verse 8, we see one of the first impacts. The fishers shall also mourn, and all they that cast angle into the brook shall lament, and they that spread nets upon the water shall languish. So there's two large reservoirs near Wabash, Indiana, where my dad lives. And they had some kind of problem with one of the dams that dam up the reservoir, and they had to release the water, which in itself was very impressive. We went down to watch all the water coming out, but the result of that was the reservoir shrank. And so we went back a later day and we went to walk around, and the first thing you notice, you didn't have to see, yes, there was a smell, there was an odor, because there were dead fish everywhere, there were dead plants everywhere that were rotting, and it was not a place. What you didn't see was any fishermen out there in their hip waders and casting out the line and reeling it in. You know, if you wanted to get fish, you just reached down and picked one up, but you didn't want that fish. And so the fishing industry, it's gone. Those that spread nets upon the waters, it's gone. There's no fish to catch. And so those who depended on it for a living, their livelihood is gone. Those who depend on it for food, their food source is gone. Verse 9, what else did it impact? Moreover, they that work in fine flax and they that weave network shall be confounded. What would they use the flax for? Cindy, this is probably your territory.
Yeah, they make cloth out of it.
Yeah,
Linen actually is made from flax.
Yeah, a linen type of cloth. And okay, this is way outside of my field, but my understanding is not only, of course, do you need the plant itself, but the process of turning it into a cloth material used water. I don't
know exactly how to do that, but
yeah, I don't either. But if you don't have water and you don't have plants,
and maybe they had water wheels that drove the spinning.
Yeah, I don't know. But either way, the industry was devastated. So if you made your living by making cloth, all of a sudden you didn't have an income. If you made a living by buying cloth from those who made it, maybe making clothing and then selling it to people, guess what? It's that trickle down thing, you know, except it's the opposite of what you want, you know, trickle down economics. Well, the problem with trickle down economics is when there is no economy, there's nothing to trickle down. And so devastating. Verse 10, and they shall be broken in the purposes thereof, all that make sluices and ponds for fish, which is kind of interesting because that sounds a lot like our fish farms that we have today. Nothing new under the sun. I don't know if you remember the debate between Ken Ham and Bill Nye, but Bill Nye just refused to believe that Noah could have built a ship the size of the ark because his family were New England shipbuilders and they didn't have the technology then. So there's no way that Noah could. No. Technology. Okay. Yeah. We've got some breakthroughs that, you know, they'd have a hard time, you know, duplicating this, But making a fish farm, damming it up and having, where the fish could lay eggs and you could raise them. Sure, they could do that. But if there's no water, what's left? It's interesting. And they shall be broken in the purposes thereof. The word purpose there is foundation or pillars. And I say it's interesting because that's actually what we're seeing throughout all of the Egyptian society. Their foundations are being ripped away. Their income, their food, their clothing. I mean, they're losing all these things that you just count on. Prior to 2020, you assumed that if you walked into Meijer or Walmart and needed toilet paper,
You just walk over there and buy some.
and not only did you had to spend 5 minutes deciding which to buy. And then all of a sudden, hey, wait a moment. There's no toilet paper on the shelves, except for that really, really cheap stuff that feels like sandpaper. There was one roll of that. That was it. We can laugh about that. At least we can now. This was far worse. This is going to cause famine, loss of life, all of these things. All right, moving on. Verse 11. Surely the princes of Zoan. Well, the first question is, where's Zoan?
Well, we must figure it's maybe in Egypt.
Okay, it's in Egypt. And they chose, God speaking through Isaiah, chose this. If God were bringing a woe onto Saginaw County, he probably would not say, surely the princes of Chesaning are fools. Well, he might say that. I don't know. But he wouldn't choose Chesaning. Why?
The least of these thy brethren.
Yeah, exactly. Because Chesaning is this little tiny village, and you got Saginaw. The same thing, he probably wouldn't, choose Birdland instead of, Burton or Flint or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, that's a pretty good hint that Zoan is probably a fairly major city. If I mentioned the other name it's known as, you might recognize it, Tanis. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, it's. I'm actually looking at it on the map, and it
Okay.
says Zoan right next to it.
Okay.
And Avarice is the other name.
So Tanis.
And Ramesses is the name that's here. He was one of the pharaohs.
Okay, so Tanis was one of the capital cities at different times because that moved around a lot because there was all these conflicting governments. It was also one of the treasure cities. So this was an important one. It was east of the Nile. So if we're changing this to be Egypt here and the Nile River instead of the Jordan River, so switch gears. This is no longer Jerusalem here, but the Nile River is here. It's actually east of it.
It's in the land of Goshen, according to this. I mean, it looks like it's.
So it
close to
doesn't
Goshen.
show as east.
It is east.
Eastern part, but which side of the Nile? East of the Nile. Okay,
Yes.
then we're on the same track. Thank you. I don't know.
Yeah, no, Goshen is on this side.
So if you were coming, so now Judah's over there, and Judah's going to play an important role, but we'll get to that next year. If you were coming from Judah to the Nile, you would probably pass through Zoe. So this was an important city to travel. It was a capital city much of the time. And so the leaders, the princes, the rulers of Zoan, depending on what time period, would have been the rulers of Egypt, the princes of Egypt. And so what does it tell us about them? They are surely fools. Okay, they probably wouldn't like to be called that.
No, I think they'd like the next one better. Wise counselors of Pharaoh.
Yeah, but you stop
read the
too
whole
soon.
sentence.
Yes, it has become brutish. What's that mean?
Stupid.
Yeah, animal. Just there's no actual wisdom. Just so let's take a look at this because that would be offensive. I mean, who likes to be called a fool? Pick me. No, nobody does. But let's go to 1 Kings chapter 4. So 1 Kings, early on, who might it be talking about? Okay, let me make it simple. We're talking about fools versus
Wise.
Wise.
Solomon.
like maybe Solomon.
Yeah.
So in 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 30, we read, let's pick up at verse 29 to keep our context. And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much and largest of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and
All the wisdom of Egypt.
so Egypt was picked as a standard of wisdom. Okay, because if a community, if a nation is known as being foolish, you wouldn't say, wow, he's smarter than those fools. That's not much of an accolade. But if you take a people that's known for their wisdom and say his wisdom far exceeded that of Egypt, they were known for being wise. Do you think that that could lead to maybe some pride issues?
I would definitely think so.
Well, not anymore, because now they're fools. And Isaiah, speaking for the Lord, there's no political correctness here. But what they're doing is foolish leadership. In hindsight, if you had been in charge, looking back on it, 2020 hindsight in 2020, I didn't do that intentionally. Would you have handled all this COVID stuff differently?
Well, yeah, if you knew what the outcome was going to be, it'd be easy to make good choices, use good judgment.
We can point fingers and say there were some really foolish decisions made, and I think there probably were, but part of it was,
Lack of knowledge.
lack of knowledge. What's that?
How to pack my suitcase differently.
That's true. Yes. Yes, because some of your belongings are still over there, and
Probably in the landfill.
or I don't know. Do they have?
Not really.
Okay.
Maybe Goodwill, not really.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, you
It's
definitely.
possible there's some Chinese person over there walking around with my hiking boots.
We probably don't have big enough feet.
Hold that thought though, Beth, because that's actually kind of interesting what we're coming up to here. And so, how say ye unto Pharaoh, verse 11, I am the son of the wise, the son of ancient kings. Look at how wise I am. Well, yeah, look how wise you are. Your cities are being devastated. There's people starving. There's brother fighting against brother. Yeah, that's real wisdom. You're planning really showing through. And we come to verse 12 and we read, where are they? Where are thy wise men? And let them tell thee now, and let them know what the Lord of hosts hath purposed upon Egypt. Let them tell me my plans. And you want to know something? They can't. They don't know God's plans. They didn't know COVID was coming, or they would have packed a lot differently. They didn't know that the Nile was going to dry up. They can't know. Unlike, for example, in Genesis, someone who did know that devastation was coming to Egypt. Who was that?
Moses. No. Yeah.
Joseph.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. That's,
7 years
yeah.
of good,
Good years.
7 lean years. How did Joseph know? Because he was really wise?
No.
Because he listened to the Lord. They didn't. They had no way. And 2020 hindsight, they could have looked and said, you know what? Maybe we should have diversified out a little more rather than depending so strongly on the Nile River. But they had a long history. That Nile River, it was always there. It always brought them water, always, irrigated their fields. If your field needed irrigated, what did they say you had to do?
Dig a hole, drag a stick from the
Yeah,
Nile over
you
to
just
your
kick
field.
a little trench with your foot. And
Yeah.
there, your field would be irrigated. Michelle?
It reminds me of Flint GM in the 70s.
The things that we count on.
Yeah.
Yeah, who could ever overtake GM? No way. I mean, Toyota? Yeah, I mean, come on. Okay. Minor rabbit trail. There's this car. It was Honda's first car. It was the Honda 360. And then they built a bigger one with a big block that was a Honda 600. And unfortunately, Tom, we're talking cubic
CCs?
centimeters instead of
CCs.
cubic
but
inches.
I remember the 600.
But they brought the 360, not the 600. They brought the 360 over to America to test it, and they took it to San Francisco, and they tried to drive up one of the hills in San Francisco, and they couldn't make it. So they had to back down. They revved it up to red line, popped the clutch, and it couldn't make it. It couldn't make it. It didn't have enough power to get up the hills of San Francisco. Where was I going with that? I have no idea, but I was actually just watching Jay Leno, and he has a Honda 600. 9,500 RPM red line, by the way. Yeah. Oh, I know what it was. You know, how could that Honda ever pass up any of GM products? They can't even get up the hills of San Francisco. But look at history. And all of a sudden, GM wasn't there. Look at Flint. All of a sudden, GM wasn't providing the jobs that it used to provide. And if you were counting on that, you're in trouble. And so they failed to diversify. Verse 13, the princes of Zoan are become fools. The princes of Noph. Okay, so what do you think about Noph?
Memphis.
Okay, Memphis, exactly. No, Elvis isn't there. But Memphis, another capital city at different times. A little further south, I think, on the map.
I have to turn back to the-
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
south, and that one's right on the Nile,
okay.
which Zoan is much, much closer to the Great Sea.
So the princes of Zoan are become fools. The princes of Noph are deceived. Well, I'll tell you what. There was some GM leadership that was convinced that there was no way that Japanese import cars could ever take over. There's no way. And so they let things continue the way that they were. And again, look at history. They have also seduced Egypt, even they that are the stay of the tribes thereof. The word stay there is the idea of the mainstay. Because who do you look for? Who do you look, under those circumstances? Famine, water shortages, loss of jobs, food sources are gone. What do? You look for the mainstays of your civilization, your government. And you look to the government and say, we need your help. So, who do we look for? Well, we look at during critical emergencies like hurricanes and things like that. Who do we look for to come in and fix everything? FEMA. Okay, good. Want FEMA to come in. You have massive expenses to deal with this thing. Who do you look for? You look for the federal government to give us a bailout. You look for our military to defend us. Those are the mainstays of America. The mainstays of Egypt are gone. They've turned into fools. I'll tell you what, if you're actually in an emergency situation like flooding in Louisiana or something like that, you quickly find out that FEMA is incredibly limited in what it can do. This is man against God's creation corrupted by the fall. And man's just this little bitty thing. There's you expect FEMA to come in and fix things. They can't. They can try, they can improve things. And so the mainstays of the tribe have been deceived. They've become fools. And then verse 19 makes it very, very vivid picture here. The Lord hath mingled a perverse spirit in the midst thereof, and they have caused Egypt to err in every work thereof, as a drunken man staggereth in his vomit. Okay? The idea is that they're staggering from one foolish idea to another, trying to fix this. Again, we kind of saw some of that in 2020, where the governments, our own included, were just, we got to do something, so we'll just shut everything down, or we got to do something, so we'll. And I'm glad I wasn't in the position of having to make those decisions. But you look back, and I think it would look like the path of a drunk. Going staggering over here and trying something. That doesn't work. So he staggers over here. That's the leadership that Egypt was counting on. And then it culminates in verse 15. Neither shall there be any work in Egypt, which is the head or the tail, the branch or the rush may do. From head to foot, there's nobody able to step in and fix this. Nobody able to step in and work their way out of this mess. We're going to stop there. because there's a transition before verse 16. There's a paragraph break. And we're going to stop there. But remember the purpose of the burdens. The primary purpose, yes, Doug.
In your studies, did you ever find out if the river ever did dry up to that extent?
We'll look more into
I
that.
know the second half of the chapter is future.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if the river had ever.
I don't know. I don't find any historical evidence of this having been fully met. Definitely, yes, they've had times where they've gone through hardships, but not to this extent. So is this something that's going to be still future even today? Good question. I don't know. The primary purpose of the burdens was a message not to Babylon, not to the Philistines, not to Moab. The primary message was to who?
Israel.
To say what?
Do not think that if you ally yourself with Egypt, that's going to solve your problems, because look what's going to happen to them. Do not think that allying yourself with the Moabites is going to solve your problems. Look what's happening to them. Don't rely on Assyria, Babylon, any of these, all the way around. All of these countries are all going to fail. And relying on them is not an answer. So rely on me.
If you're going to choose someone as an ally, you don't want to choose people that are divided and infighting among themselves. They're not going to help you much. You don't want to choose people that have a collapsing economy, because people with a collapsing economy, they don't give. They have their hands out. Give us. You don't ally yourself with people that are making foolish decisions. None of those things help. It's a reminder that your only true source of security is God. By the way, that's just as true today. If you're counting on the federal government, if you're counting on our military, if you're counting on FEMA, I'll tell you what, if you're counting on Social Security, you are on really, really shaky grounds. If you're counting on God, God can provide under any circumstances. And so, I walk away from this, and by the way, it gets better. And that's what Doug's talking about in the second half of this. And then it kind of switches gears a little bit more in chapter 20, but it gets better. There's a positive result of this. And God, I don't know where I was going with this, but God, even as we were talking about in Isaiah, and I mean in Romans, God has a purpose, and He can even bring something out of devastation like this to glorify Him. The other thing that I find encouraging is, so these things are happening because of God's actions. The river Nile dried up because of God's actions. If God can dry up a river, what else can He do?
He can turn it back on.
He can turn it back on. You know how much sleep I lose over global warming or climate change?
Probably about as much as I do.
Yeah, none. Do I think we should be good stewards of what God's given us? Absolutely. Do I lose sleep over the temperature rising over the next 100 years? No, because this is God's creation. He's in control, and it's going to do what He has planned. Again, yep, we should be good stewards, but I don't worry about it. I think we should be good stewards as citizens of the United States. And we just finished our study on a biblical analysis of our culture. And I think there's things that we should be wisely considering before we vote in the elections. And there may be areas where we should be contacting our congressmen and so on. But do I worry? No, I don't lose sleep over it. Again, I think there's areas that we can be concerned about and prayerfully consider, what can I do? But the God who can divide a nation can also heal a nation. The God who can bring devastating ecological disaster can also resolve that ecological situation. And it's a reminder to us, just like it was a reminder to Judah. Don't turn to others. Because remember, this all started back with who? King Ahaz, back in chapter 7, where he formed an alliance with Assyria against
the northern tribes, Israel.
Yeah, is Israel and Syria, not Assyria. They were allied together. And God said, no, come to me and ask for my help. And Ahaz said no. And the results were they found themselves surrounded. Judah found themselves surrounded by the Assyrians, their
They
allies.
Modaked all of the 10 northern tribes and then said, ew, look at the cherry on top of Mount Zion there. Let's have that one too.
Exactly. And so now Isaiah is saying, learn your lesson. Look around you. Don't count on Assyria. Don't count on Babylon. Don't count on Moab. Don't count on any of them. Count on me. Trust in me. And that's a really good way to end our study in Isaiah in 2022. We'll pick it up. Isaiah chapter 19, verse 16. We'll pick up January 1st, 2023. Wow.
I just got used to writing 2022.
Exactly. I mean, we've been checking out books for patrons that are due in 2023 for the last 3 weeks now. So it's like, yep, it's coming, whether you're ready or not. So, questions or comments about Isaiah chapter 19? Okay. Normal Wednesday service. We're finishing up our study on angelology this Wednesday. Christmas Day, again, 9:45 devotional, brunch, and then a morning service that'll have more special music and so on. No evening service, so no Isaiah Bible study. New Year's Eve, 6:00. Bring a favorite board game, bring a snack to pass, and we'll have some soups and I don't know what all. I don't know. Is that under control?
It will be before that.
Okay. Come prepared to do an escape room challenge, and New Year's Day will be just a normal Sunday. So let's pray and we'll be dismissed. Our Heavenly Father, thank you, Lord, for demonstrating time and time again that you keep your promises. You do what you say you'll do. You provide for us when we need it. You direct us. You give us wisdom when we ask for it. You provide. You watch over. Father, I thank you for that. Help us to trust you and not place our trust in our government. Even our closest friends, our family can fail because we're human, we're flesh. But Father, you never fail us. I thank you for that. Thank you for the hope that it gives us, even as the direction our society's going can be either depressing or frightening, depending on how you look at it. Father, we know you have a purpose. We know that you could bring revival to our land. And Father, I pray that you would use us to share Jesus this week. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. And with that, you're dismissed.